And welcome. Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is going to be a fascinating person who's going to share with us what is simply called cellular wisdom. It's that inner drive, that inner knowing, that information that we have inside of us that drives and compels us forward to live a life that we were meant to be living. And we're going to see if we can kind of tune into that, because you ever find yourself when you've swayed off course a little bit that you just feel something just isn't right? Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, maybe you're even traveling to a foreign country or maybe even just into another county within your own state, and you think to yourself, something's just not right. Or what about the fulfillment you feel when you're actually on your path and you think to yourself, God, I feel all this success and I don't understand why, because it just seems to be coming to me so easy. Well, let's talk about what that is. And I'd like to welcome to our program Dr. Joan C. King, and we're going to be talking about cellular wisdom. And Joan, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
I'm happy to do so.
Now, it's really interesting because you really have approached this subject not as, say, in the typical world that you see in media today of metaphysics, but you're actually a real scientist who did real research on real cellular intelligence. Let's talk about your story and how you came to create cellular wisdom.
Absolutely. I got my PhD from Tulane University in 1972, and immediately I had begun research at that time. My dissertation research were changes in the brain that had occurred at a structural level revealed by electron microscopy as a consequence of a single hormone injection to an animal soon after birth. And what that happened was when the testosterone hormone was administered, the animal did not cycle or have any reproductive cycles for its entire reproductive lifespan. And so I began to understand the power and the magnificence of the synchrony that the brain does provide between various parts of the body in making things on time happen and kind of accelerate action. And so as I studied cells more and more, as I became I went to Tufts University as a faculty member after doing a postdoc at the University of Iowa, and I was at Tufts from 79 until 99, but I took a leave of absence the last year to reconsider what was it that I was studying. Maybe I had missed the fundamental message of the cells. What if I had been looking at how cells act, but had not been looking at the fact that maybe the body was, and the cells and systems of the body were more than to just have us navigate the world. What if they were internal teachers to teach us how to thrive? Because I had gained a great respect for the fact that cells know how to thrive. They need very little when you put them down in a dish for them to reach out to each other, to connect, and to thrive.
You know, I was going to say that's an interesting point, because I remember seeing it was a documentary on neurocells as well as and heart cells, and you could separate two heart cells and put them separately from each other, and even though they're beating irregular, eventually they start getting attuned, even though they're not connected to each other, and then they start beating in synchronicity. And I thought, that's fascinating, the information. How's that being, how that information is being transmitted? You know, what's going on there?
And so I started the sabbatical that I took and leave of absence was to ask myself the question, what is it that I know about all this stuff that I've studied that I didn't know at the time that that's what I was exploring? And so I re-explored what I knew, but I asked it from a different perspective. Now I was asking, what's the lesson that the cells are teaching us? First of all, as an individual, and so that's the first half of my book, The Code of Authentic Living, Cellular Wisdom. And the second half is cells must connect to each other, because if they don't, they literally die. And so how cells can teach us about relationships, from intimate relationships to corporate to planetary relationships. And that's the second half of the book, The Code of Authentic Living, Cellular Wisdom. And then I have a series of workbooks that apply this, because I'm a coach, and I've watched what has stopped both me and other people in leading the life that you just explained a few minutes ago, where everything works, where things synchronistically happen and it feels easy and it's in flow. And so I have a series of 4 workbooks. 2 of them are finished. One is Cellular Wisdom for Women, and in a workbook. The one I'm just finishing, it's not out yet, is Cellular Wisdom at Work, the Business of Wisdom. And the other 2 are going to be Cellular Wisdom for Relationships and Cellular Wisdom for Men. And the reason that I engage in exploring these concepts is I really want to make this practical for people. And so I want to address the issues that come up for women, the issues that come up for work or relationships or for men, from the point of view of what would be the lessons that the cells would tell us about how to resolve those issues or overcome those challenges. Because I believe this cellular wisdom is in our very life force.
Well, there's no doubt about that, Joan. I know that now you see more of your mainstream media outlets really dabbling or bringing in the metaphysical trend of the power of intention and manifesting, your own reality, realizing that you can create your own reality. And I mean, when you start having guys like Larry King, for instance, having Debbie Ford on his program and Deepak Chopra on his program,
right.
Whereas 10 years ago, this guy wouldn't have even thought twice about it. There's a real pulse going on here, but the interesting part about it is you're hearing from more metaphysicists than real true science physicists, and you kind of blend the 2 together. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, when I began to explore that concept, what would the cells tell us, it was like I had to listen to a different part of my being than I had ever listened to before, because I realized that cellular wisdom is quiet. It's pre-verbal, which means it doesn't come out and articulate exactly what it is you should do and spell out your trajectory. And so my rational mind, which had all been distinctly honed through all my graduate studies and my research, had to, in a sense, integrate with another part of me that I'd never integrated before. And that was the part that knew without knowing how it knew, that had this sense of direction when there was no logical reason for why that trajectory would be the preferred one. And so literally writing these books has been my own personal journey of integrating what I know logically with so much more. In fact, I think the conscious mind can only get around 20% of reality, because so much of reality is something we can't articulate. I mean, you walk into a room and you meet somebody for the first time, and there's this instant feeling like you've known this person before, and there's a sense of comfort. And within a minute, you guys could start talking about things that with other people might have taken you 10 years to get to talk about. Well, where did that come from? And I think it comes from this deeper energy connection. That is, both of you are vibrating on a frequency of energy that's very compatible. And so you understand each other, and the words mean so much more because you have similar understandings of those words. And I think that comes out of the deeper level of being. And if we could integrate our conscious mind, which I had spent so much time developing, with this aspect of ourselves that is more ephemeral, more difficult to get your hands around, I think that we become the powerful beings we were meant to be. In fact, I think the real reason that we are inhabiting this earth in a physical body is to come to understand the magnificence of who we are, which is beyond our wildest imaginations.
That's very well put, Joan. It reminds me of the wonderful pioneer, if you will, Gene Roddenberry, who created the highly successful Star Trek series. And there was an episode in there where there were 3 entities that came to the Enterprise. They ended up possessing Kirk, Spock, and then I guess it was a female yeoman. And one of them, the Spock guy was kind of a young sort of soul, and he wanted to be rascally and wily and sort of nasty, whereas the other 2 were more wise and more like parents. And so anyway, they realized, well, thank you for the ride, but we can't do this anymore, but thanks for the opportunity for us to know what it is to feel, to breathe, to taste, to touch, to even express emotion. And, of course, they end that particular episode with the 2 asking permission to come back together again because it was man and woman just to feel and touch each other again.
Yeah.
And what a special gift that is. And you think, okay, if that's true, that we're all so connected on a physics plane, so to speak, why do we get so stuck in our ruts and then let our minds, for instance, keep us in a direction that just keeps us seemingly unhappy and unfulfilled?
Well, so many people are rewarded by society for doing what they don't really love to do, but they're good at. And that's a great distinction to make. The difference between what we really love to do and what we're really good at. There are a lot of things I'm really good at that I will not do anymore because I don't love doing them. And
right.
I now engage in the things that I love doing. And the difference in the energy of creation that you're able to bring forth is enormous. I mean, many years ago, Martha Graham, the dancer, had a beautiful quote about the uniqueness of us all and about if you don't bring what you have to the world, it will be lost because no one else can bring it.
Right.
And I think that people tend to look at each other through the lenses of who they are. And so if you love doing X, Y, and Z, and you meet somebody who's good at it but doesn't love it, you can't imagine that they don't love it because you love it, so you think they ought to love it.
Right.
And so some of the people I've interviewed for the book Cellular Wisdom at Work have told me stories about how they were in the corporate world and they got enormously rewarded for their successes there. But they were getting dried up and tired, and they really didn't like what they were doing, but they kept doing it because everybody was telling them how great they are.
Right.
And I think our society has a certain lens whereby we look at people. We look at their wealth, we look at their homes, we look at their cars, we look at how they dress, we look at the salary they make, we look at their level in an organization. And, there are these parameters of, oh, boy, you really fit. Well, that's fitting by seeing the outside box. The spirit of the person might be dying inside. And it is that power of recognizing that if we don't honestly be who we authentically are in the world and we try to force ourselves into something else, many times people get sick at that point. I know when I was in academia, I was chair of the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology for the medical, dental, and veterinary schools. I was a research director for a research facility that served 3 campuses of Tufts, Boston, Medford, and Grafton. And it would look like I'm the epitome of success. And inside I was saying, is that all there is?
Right.
And that's when I took the sabbatical and asked myself, what had I missed? And I had heard this legend that really did affect me. And the legend was that the American Indians knew the white man was coming. And so they had this discussion about how can we protect our wisdom, because surely the white man will destroy it. And so they talked about putting it in the mountains. Oh, no, they'll find it there. Or the ocean. No, they'll find it there. And they explored all these possibilities until finally this very old Indian said, I know, we'll put it within. They'll never think of looking for it there. And so that's when I started to explore, wow, so what is within that really we haven't explored? And what could it be how our cells can teach us? Maybe they're our inner teacher. Mm-hmm. And that's how I began to want to put together how can we thrive as human beings by looking to see how cells thrive. And that's when I brought together the science and then the meaning of that science for life.
Now, it's interesting because people sometimes, just as you said earlier, we tend to look outside of ourselves, the way our society views us through the lens of what a measure of success is, as though success is what's the most important thing. But it's always weighed and measured by possible material acquisitions and sometimes contributions.
Right.
And so people become very frustrated when they don't feel they're attaining those things, as though they're lost. Now, how would you say, as you said, it was about inner, and you hear a lot about that in this day and age, especially from the metaphysical community. It's manifesting what's inside of you to create your outside reality, but people get just darn right confused and frustrated because they don't know probably how to do that, even though all of us do inherently know how to do that.
So I would say that one of the ways that I began to reconstruct my life when I left science, actually the first thing I did was take a parasailing jump off of a mountain in Tellois, France, over Lake Annecy.
I remember reading about that.
Which was scary for me because I can't swim and I'm afraid of heights. But I needed to do something that would tell me that if I turned away from the only profession I had known for my entire life, that I would be okay. And when those sails filled with air, I screamed to the top of my lungs, ooh la la, because I felt I'd really been supported by the universe, and then I could go find my way. So the way I found my way was I began to explore what was it in my life that had brought me a sense of deep fulfillment. And I could remember, often it's stuff we did as a child that has clues to, I can remember I gave my cousins crackers if they'd just sit down in chairs and let me talk to them. Let me stand up in the front and talk. I mean, I was 5 years old, and I certainly had no idea of a profession. But what I was enjoying so much is the opportunity to express something out loud to other people. And that, of course, had kept me in academia a long time because I taught medical students neuroscience, and I had before taught chemistry in a smaller college, topics that aren't typically easy for people to learn, and I had the joy of making it easy. So I knew that a part of my life was going to be speaking. I knew that a part of my life, I had always believed in people's potential. And when I heard about coaching and realized the basic philosophy of coaching, that coaches are not consultants, we do not provide answers for people. We are convinced the person has the answer within, they just don't know it. So our job is to ask the questions to help the person find that answer. So I was really drawn to that. And I think if we stop looking at what is it we have to do, you know, you have to bring in this much money for the mortgage, and you have to get these kids in school, and you have to do this. Those are boxes that we build for ourselves, and we often imprison ourselves in those boxes. Well, there are other ways that we can meet those obligations if we could first be creative about who are we really? What is it we really are here to do? And fortunately, what we're here to do is something we love to do, because wouldn't that be the joke of the universe if what you were here to do would be what you hated to do? I mean, that would be ridiculous. I can remember the title of one of Alan Cohen's books is Joy is My Compass. And I often repeat that. Joy is the compass to know the direction in which to go. So if you're confused, pay attention to how you feel when you start to think, imagine yourself or envision yourself doing something. If when you envision yourself doing it, you feel a sense of freedom and you feel a sense of expansiveness, and there's this kind of, ooh, wouldn't that be great? Or, yeah, that's neat. Or if when you envision yourself, you can feel the tightness starting to come in. And for me, it's in my gut. It's like almost my intestines start to go, yuck. Well, I can tell you that's not aligned with who you really are. And we'll never make the contribution we can make to the world by doing what we're not really great at doing. In fact, I love the quotation from Walter Russell that genius is self-bestowed and mediocrity is self-inflicted.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in today's world. Here's where the cellular wisdom part, I think, really kicks in, because you just described it's those feelings you feel.
Yes.
And I think too many people get the confusion that that's an emotional response. Well, emotion is actually the expression of a natural biological electromagnetic feeling. Describe that in scientific terms.
Well, first of all, there's a difference between emotion and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Emotion is actually something that usually persists. It's something evoked by the emotional brain, which is right in the middle of the brain, called the limbic system. And when it's activated, you feel sad or you feel depressed or etc. But what keeps an emotion going are your thoughts. So let's say your husband's late for dinner. And so you're first disappointed. But then, now here we go. This is not the first time he's been late. Boy, he's got a new secretary. Wonder what's happening there. Why is he late now? Before you know it, by the time the poor guy comes home, you say, I want a divorce. Because what has kept that emotion going, the emotion itself will only exist for about a minute. What keeps it going are your thoughts about it. And because of the way the emotional brain is put together, it's a circuit that reinforces and recruits many more neurons. So that, for example, when the thought first comes up, my husband's late, well, that might be a disappointment, and maybe there are 10 neurons involved. But it's not the first time. Now you start to recruit the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system, now gets kicked in. Now you're up to 5,000 neurons. And a new secretary started this week. Oh, boy. Okay, now you're up to 50,000 neurons. And as you go about weaving the fabric of this story, you're recruiting more and more and more neurons. So by the time he comes home, you're just really raging mad. Now, that's not emotion. Emotion was the 2 minutes when you felt that disappointment. You were feeding that emotion by your thoughts. Now, a feeling is something that usually has no words attached to it. It's a sense of comfort or ease. It's not really something that you can say, like, I'm disappointed. That's an emotion. A feeling is comfort or discomfort. It's that, I think there's a commercial on TV right now where a girl says, you know how she's saying this to the dog, you know how you feel when I tickle your tummy? Well, that's how I feel when I eat this yogurt or something. Well, it's like the feeling of the dog when you're tickling his tummy. It's this deeper kind of sense of something. It's not well formed. It's not in words like, it couldn't be disappointment. It's more fundamental than that. But it's that either a sense of expansiveness of, like you sighing, and that feels like, you know, when you're on vacation and you've been working like crazy,
right,
and you've been working late, and you get on the plane, and you've been rushing to get on the plane, and then you land in Hawaii. And they put the lei around your neck, and you smell the freesia, and you hear the ocean, and somebody's playing a guitar. And it's like, now that's a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to learn to get in touch with our feelings and not confuse them with the emotions and then the overlay of thoughts that we put on top of emotions. So get back to, well, does this feel good? Is it pleasant? Does this feel like an opening? But you won't necessarily have words to it. It's not jealousy. It's not love. It's not those things, because those are the emotions that we then feed with thoughts. The feelings are much more deeply embedded in our own cellular wisdom. So if when you shake somebody's hand, that just feels really good, that's more like a feeling. Or when you look up and you see the sky and the sun's just rising, and that brings about a tide of relaxation, that's a feeling. So if we paid attention to our true feelings, not the emotions and the scenarios that we construct around those emotions, but the instantaneous kind of feeling, we get more in touch in who we really are. Yeah. And not the stories we've created about who we are.
For those of you just tuning in, we're talking with Dr. Joan C. King about cellular wisdom, which is inherent in all of us. Now, Joan, as I was reading in your book, what I found to be a fascinating thought just to sit and meditate on is how you talk about the millions of years of, say, human evolution and cellular makeup and intelligence.
Yeah.
These are messages that move forward to where we are today. Now, again, we each express our lives uniquely for the special purpose that we were put here, part of the universal or God's plan. But too many of us seem to vibrate away from that, and we don't trust in it. Now, how do you suggest people vibrate back into it?
Well, first of all, an interesting exercise to do is to sit down and draw circles around things that you do. So there'd be the circle around food, like do you love to cook, or do you go out to restaurants all the time? You know, what do you do around the idea of food? In my family, which is half Italian and half Yugoslav, food was always associated with a celebration. So food was always a time to feel good. And so I got interested in cooking, and I love to cook, and that's the way I celebrate. Mm-hmm. Now, when you look at work, how do you look at work? Do you look at work as total obligation? How much does it juice you? I want to read the Martha Graham quote because I just found it again, and I just think it's so inspiring. May I do that?
You could, absolutely.
There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and be lost. The world will not have it. Mm-hmm. And so if when we look at our activities, we're able to imagine I have my clients imagine a clock in front of them, and I call it the joy clock. And when the clock hands are at 12 o'clock, that is full joy. Man, I just love that. And when it's at 1 o'clock, it's, there's not too much joy here. And it goes around, and you can kind of see, So let me look at the activities around food. Let me look at the activities around work. Let me look at the activities around family. Let me look at my relationships in my community. Let me look at my relationships globally, because we're starting to live a much more global lifestyle today as we're able to communicate with people across the country. I have clients in places like Vietnam that I work with via Skype. And, that wasn't possible a few years ago. So where is the joy there? If you look at your joy clock while you look at these different activities, it won't be long before you can spot what is it that really brings you a lot of joy, because that's where your genius is. And it's not going to be in the stuff that you hate. And if you can bring your strengths, because, people underestimate their strengths all the time. I mean, how many people do you give them a compliment and say, hey, Joe, you did a great job there? And what's the typical response? It was nothing. Well, the reason it was nothing is because it's easy for you to do it. That's why you think it's nothing. Uh-huh. I've had clients who are people who are in the financial world, and they'll say, numbers are so easy. I mean, anybody can do numbers. Well, bull. Not anybody can do numbers. So stop underestimating your strengths, because the world tends to make you look at your weaknesses. What do I have to improve on? What am I not doing well? Well, I would say, what are you doing well?
Good point, Joan. I wanted to bring up, because I remember there's a book out there. It's called The 4-Hour Work Week, and it's by Tim Ferriss, and he says just that. He says, we're in a society today that says we should work constantly on our weaknesses to build them to strengths. And he says, nonsense. What you should be doing is working in your strengths and having others maybe fill those gaps that you would consider to be your weaknesses, and let's be a team.
Absolutely. Well, think about it. Let's say you have X amount of energy, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, your strengths, if you look at your strengths in relation to your productivity, your strengths are creating most of your productivity, okay? If you look at your relationship of your weaknesses to your productivity, your weaknesses are not contributing a lot to your productivity. Now, let's then take, okay, if you add X amount of energy to your strengths, what are you going to do to your productivity? Increase it. If you do add that same amount of energy to your weaknesses, how much are you going to increase your productivity?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it only makes sense that whereas our society, I mean, even if you watch soap operas or if you watch TV episodes, it's all about what people do wrong. It's all about the problems. And there are only a few programs that really look at when people do things right. Mm-hmm. Look at what happens. Look at the joy that you get when you use your strengths and the joy that you get out of doing something you can do well and love to do. That's where the fulfillment is. And I think we've been led astray that fulfillment will come from the outside. Well, it just won't. Fulfillment has to come from the inside. And our cells teach us that. For example, our cells live all of their activities directed by the DNA that's in their cells. If the DNA is not in the cell doesn't do it. It only does what the DNA gives it the capacity to do. But we try to do stuff. If we look at the DNA, let's say, is equal to our strengths and our values and our passions, and if that's equal to the DNA in our beings, then our fulfillment is going to come from working with our strengths, from our values, contributing to our passions. And we should be paying attention to what we want rather than what we don't want.
Now, when you think of the movie Field of Dreams, here was that intercellular wisdom, if you will, that was whispering to him that he needs to build a baseball field.
Yeah, and people thought he was crazy, right?
Not only that, but here's the tough part, too. You know, when you take a look at, for instance, how you left what you were doing, you know, working with Tufts, you were a nun, Dominican nun, for instance, and now you're on a totally different life path, but you could see how those lessons shaped the way you present what you share today.
Absolutely.
But taking a look at Street of Dreams, you know, I've heard this cliche, especially when we first started our business constantly. If you build it, they will come. Okay, I'm sick of hearing that. You know, I already understand what it is. It's stupid to even hear it anymore. But what to me was interesting about the movie is the frustration he felt by going on that path when, you know, his wife's saying, "Look, we're about to lose our farm because you're doing this," and you know, and there it is. So it's like losing that Skinner's box, if you will. But he finally got to a frustrating point that I thought was so inherent in all of us, and why we don't take that leap of faith a lot of times, because he was at the point, I've done all this. What's in it for me? I'm about to lose just about everything here. And then all of a sudden, of course, how the movie ends is inherently they said, no, you're about to be rewarded far greater than you can ever imagine.
Right.
And it happened. So what does it take for a person that they can get on that authentic path, but most importantly, stay on it and trust that they'll be okay?
Well, you know, it's so interesting for me to watch what happens to my clients who make that decision. And often what happens is the following. You make a courageous decision, whether it's to build a field of dreams or to leave the convent, or, as my husband said to me, so let me get this right. You're a full professor at a major medical school in the Northeast, and you want to leave it with tenure for the rest of your life, and you want to leave it to be a coach. Is that right?
Right.
I said, yes, and that's right. So what is it that allows us to make that courageous transition? And I think that the first thing that happens is the universe puts challenges in our way, because I think there is a questioning of how much do you really want this? Is this something that is a fantasy that is kind of juicy for you to play with while you think about it in your imagination? But when it really comes down to it, you might have to give up this and you might have to give up that, and you may have to be challenged in this direction. How willing are you for that to happen. And I can remember when I didn't know about the coaching yet, I just went around saying, I say yes to the universe. I don't know what I'm saying yes to, but I say yes to it, and I'll be shown the way. And so every time I've said, show me the way, here's a problem, here's a challenge, my first thought is there. I remember Einstein saying, you never solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created the problem. And how many of us try to figure out our way through a problem? I've come to understand we can't figure our way out, that the universe is so much bigger than our conscious minds can get around it. What we have to ask for is the collaboration with, to be shown a path that's authentic for us, and be willing. There are going to be sacrifices, but every time there's a sacrifice, there's something you're letting go of, some expectation, some need that you have. When people talk about abundance, they usually mean they expect a check in the mail. Well, there's abundance in all. Look at the abundance of your relationships. Mm-hmm. Look at the abundance of the people that you interact with in the course of a day, a week, a month, a year. Look at the abundance of what you have within you. If you had any idea of the abundance of how cells collaborate and synchronize just for you to breathe and walk and talk and see, there would be a sense of respect and awe. Well, I think when we approach if we approach the transition with the question, what am I going to have to give up? It's like looking at what you don't want. That's what you'll see. If you approach the transition with, I want to transition to a level of consciousness that I've never had before that will allow me to be the person I want to be. Show me the way to do that. Mm-hmm. Those opportunities will arise. And then your answer will be yes to the opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that as you talk about a person, first of all, having the courage to say, I want to go on this life path, this is what I desire. Then you say, it's like taking a metaphysical concept or an idea and bringing it into physical reality. It doesn't always vibrate, most of the time anyway, into the way, as you said, you expect it to. Somebody starts a business the first year and they think, oh, why am I going broke here? I don't understand. I thought this thing was going to feed me and keep me into the life that I was already accustomed to. Then you realize year 2 and year 3 don't present any greater opportunities, and it feels like it's getting worse. Year 4 and year 5 come along, and it seems like, am I ever going to see my break? Mm-hmm. But I think that's the breaking point sometimes, and I don't know if it's 5 years for everybody, and then you see others, in the first 6 months, they're bringing in, $25,000 a month. You think, where did I miss the boat here? You hear that a lot, for instance, in network marketing. Right. But here's this big hero here, but how come I'm not doing it? But the question is, did you ever question why you're doing this in the first place? Was it for the money? Right. And so forth. And taking a look at cellular wisdom, you can see how it offers you not only a blueprint, but like a superconductor radar that tells you what the right things are to do. You just don't want to listen sometimes.
And also, sometimes the dream is right. But we start, and it really does align with the fundamental essence of who we are. And we feel that expansiveness when we think of it. But we've learned certain strategies to do things. And the strategies we've learned from other people. And the strategies may not be using our strengths. The strategies might be, if I want such and such, I have to do it that way. Well, maybe you don't have to do it that way. Maybe there are 10 other ways that can help you reach that goal. One of the things I think we don't do enough of is consult with like-minded people. That is, find the people you really trust and make yourself an advisory group so that you can brainstorm with them about, sometimes our perspectives are smaller because our experiences have built a preference for that set of perspectives. And there are other people who have a different set of perspectives, who you trust and who you like and who you admire. Well, why not spend a little time talking to them about your thoughts about brainstorming with them about, well, what other ways could I get there besides doing it this way? And, it's that connection thing that the cells teach us. The only cells in the body that aren't connected are red blood cells, and they die every 90 days. Connection is really important. And we tend to think America is founded on do it yourself.
Right.
You're independent. Well, we're independent, but we're interdependent. We couldn't exist alone. I mean, just look at the products we use. Half of them come from around the world. Half of them have used resources that are in many different places. That is a false concept that we have to do it alone, and it isn't the truth. Our body doesn't do it alone. Our cells don't do it alone. I often point out to people a single neuron can do absolutely nothing. We couldn't see, talk, walk, move, anything if we depended on a single neuron to do those functions. There are chains of neurons that do that. And so I think we tend to feel as though we're less than if we can't do it alone. Well, that's quite frankly bull.
Mm-hmm.
We are meant to do it together. Now, how to do it together should fit you and your style and the way you like to do things. If you're a person who likes to meet people in person, you might want to have 3 people you consult with and meet in person once a month. If you're a person who is much more introspective and would much rather have email kind of discussion board, you might want to consult with your intimate colleagues that way. I mean, if we should do it in a way, there's no one way to do anything. There are no rules, really. The rules are engage the essence of who you are and you will thrive.
Mm-hmm. I remember as we were in the first year of our program, there was a lobbyist within the state that we had on our program. And apparently after the particular show, I wasn't in on the conversation, but I was told by the producer later, he says, I'm not really so sure that your show's going to be successful, and as a matter of fact, 99% of radio shows usually don't exist after the first year to 2 years. And that seemed to be very frustrating to the producer. And I said, well, there's one thing you're missing. And she says, what? And I said, why can't we be the 1% that succeeds?
Exactly.
And whatever it takes to make that happen, I said, don't you see that we're successful already because we're doing what we wanted to produce to put out there to people? We've wanted to make a difference. We wanted to make a meaning. And you said earlier, when you take a look at true abundance, you take a look at the abundance of relationships that we've created over 5 years,
right.
The opportunities, the experiences that we've had, those things can't be weighed and measured in material success by any way, shape, or form. But you can't help but also know that somehow along the way there's this inner knowing saying, all that's going to be provided also. Just don't worry about it. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I remember a time where I was doing radio. This was about 12 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And this is a way for the listeners out there, I guess what I'm getting to with this quick story here is that when you're on your path, there will be many signs that will affirm you're going the right direction. Okay?
Right.
And when you pay attention to those, then it becomes almost awe-inspiring, as you said earlier. And here's what had happened. It's a particularly nice day. I happened to be listening to an M. Scott Peck tape, The Load Rest Traveled and Beyond, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
And I was just caught in something he was talking about, and all of a sudden I started to pay attention to a blue van that was in front of me, and this is what it said on their license plate: God bless you. And I went, oh my goodness. Because, do you understand?
I
and
do.
You see a lot of that, and that's what makes it all exciting. So maybe your mortgage, or you may even be, like in the movie Field of Dreams, about to be foreclosed on, you're going broke, but somehow inside, as frustrating and hurtful as all of that is, you just know, I've got to stick with this anyway, no matter how crazy it seems. What else would you be doing?
Yes. And so that ability to stick with it, as you think about yourself sticking with it, pay attention to how that feels inside. Like, okay, so if I stick with it, how does it feel to stick with it? Well, it might be uncertain, okay, but if it all worked out, how would that feel? And okay, let's say you're sticking with it and it doesn't work out. if you know that you have the capability to survive no matter what happens, that really we have more resources than we think we have. Look at the number. Well, I gave a talk at Tulane last week. That's my alma mater. And I was talking about strengths, and I just said, how many of you have done things you never thought you could do? And many hands went up. And this older gentleman stood up and he said, you know, after Katrina, I did things I never thought in a million years I could do. And I think what we don't realize is that within us are resources that we've never used. And I love this quote by Theodore Roosevelt, and it is that nothing is beyond our capabilities, only beyond our present self-knowledge. So you know yourself a certain way, but no matter what you know of yourself, there is more. Mm-hmm. There is more that you haven't yet expressed. So if you have a challenge to meet, there's something within you that can meet that challenge. So part of what allows you to take the risk of staying with that mortgage is the fact that if you had the knowledge that no matter what the turnout was, you would be able to meet that challenge. It makes you feel a lot stronger than if you feel you are a victim. And none of us are victims.
That's very key. You remind me, as we had Dr. Bernie Siegel on our program about a month ago, and I told him there was a quote or something that he had said in a tape series. It was a trilogy love series where, you know, deep thinkers like Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, and the like were all on this, expressing, you know, the different levels of love and expression. And he says, you just have to think that in billions of years of evolution, nobody can make a mistake quite like you can. And when you think about what we're talking about here, it doesn't matter what the outcome is. Will you be able to just survive and move on? Then you realize you can't fail.
That's right. That's
and in
exactly
knowing that,
right.
It builds you the courage to go and try the things that maybe you were afraid to do in the first place.
In fact, my belief about challenges are, can you imagine a life without challenge?
It wouldn't be good. 70 degrees and sunny all day, every day.
You wouldn't develop a lot of the resources that are within you.
Right.
Because most of the time, we develop them in response to a challenge. And so I think that the problems in our lives and the challenges that arise are actually the opportunities for us to bring forth more of who we are than we have ever known before. And just because we haven't experienced that part of ourselves before doesn't mean it's not there awaiting our call.
Mm-hmm. Now, Joan, as you've coached and held seminars and lectures with people, and people have responded to your book, Cellular Wisdom, and I understand there are two others that you've also authored as well, what kind of feedback have you been receiving, and what kind of transformation have you seen in people?
Well, the first feedback I get is, God, you know, I knew that stuff. I just didn't know it was real. And so when I read it, it was validating. It wasn't like you opened up a brand new world for me, but you validated that which I kind of ignored because I had no perspective, no way to hang it on an anchor and make it real for me. So what you've done is you've allowed me to take something that was kind of amorphous and on the side of my life and bring it into my life and use it as a resource. I've had, and by the way, for my books, if people form book clubs, I have a letter in each book that says, I'll be glad to meet with your book club by telephone or if I'm in the vicinity in person and answer the questions that came up as you were going through the book. But the most consistent comments are, you know, there was a decision I've been avoiding for a long time. Mm-hmm. And because I realized that I had this within me, this cellular wisdom that had developed over billions of years, but I'd never really reached down deep inside of me to know I could do something. I was just afraid. So many people have told me they've either left a job or taken a new job or taken on a leadership position, or unfortunately left a marriage that they knew had not been working for many years but didn't have the courage to do so, or ended a marriage that didn't seem likely to succeed but they felt really good about. My husband is 18 years younger than I am, and some people might say, that's ridiculous. Well, we've been married 30 years, and we have an extraordinary partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it helps people understand that within them are these resources that are really magnificent that maybe they've never really used before. And that if they're quiet and they pay attention to what they're feeling when they're thinking of doing something, they'll learn a lot more about themselves than they currently know, and they can stand on a path that's strong and real.
Very good. Now, if you could, for our listeners, tell them how they can find out about Cellular Wisdom, and do you have a website they can go and find out more about what Cellular Wisdom is?
Absolutely. The website is www.cellular-wisdom, not an underscore, a hyphen, wisdom.com. And on there I have the definition of cellular wisdom. I have transcripts from radio shows, etc., and products. I have a whole set of 10 hours of DVDs on workshops I did on cellular wisdom for women. And then I have a workshop for coaching, which is www.beyond-success.com, because success doesn't bring fulfillment alone. And it's in the meaning of that success that we find our fulfillment. And so my coaching is always about to evoke greatness. And my books are all about helping you evoke your greatness because it's there. I want you to believe it because it's really there.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. King, for our listeners, let them know from your experience what it looks like when a person is living their authentic person. What are some key signs that you could leave our listeners with?
What the key sign is that no matter what you're experiencing in the observable world, that is problems, challenges, etc., there's this feeling that all is well.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sense that you're doing what really reflects who you are. You're being the truth of who you are. That's number one. Number two is you're open because there's nothing that can challenge you. You know who you are. It isn't about defending. It's only about being the truth. So you're very open. You're willing to discuss anything with anybody because you're not defending yourself. You're just being the truth of who you are. And the third one is if you're open, you're also accepting and respectful for everyone else, regardless of color, creed, nationality, age, because everybody's got the same life force. Everybody has the possibility of tapping into their own cellular wisdom, and they deserve respect because they are human and they have this wisdom. We don't have to earn it. If we're alive, we have it.
Cellular Wisdom is the book, and our guest today, Dr. Joan C. King. Joan, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, and please give your website information out again.
And thank you so much for having me. www.cellular-wisdom.com and www.beyond-success.com.
Very
Remember,
good.
Claim your genius.
Because it's there.
It's
Nobody
there.
else will.
That's right.
Okay, Dr. Joan King, thank you again for joining us on the program. I feel revitalized already.
Terrific, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
You bet. For those of you listening out there, we want to thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Also want to send out a special thanks to one of our sponsors, which is Angel Health Institute, which provide people with growing the best-tasting wheatgrass, sunflower sprouts, and pea sprouts in the country. What does that equal? Life-changing nutrition. Using advanced technologies like sound frequencies, subtle energy, and ocean water, we are producing the most nutrient-dense wheatgrass and sprouts we have ever seen. Angels Health Institute is the only institute known to use subtle energy technology in our greenhouse sprouting and wheatgrass operations. You can both taste and feel the difference. Wheatgrass is good, for instance, for oxygenating the blood, building blood nutrients, alkalizing your body, reducing high blood pressure, building tissue, adding digestive enzymes, and much, much more. What does that equate to? How about the loss of disease or the prevention of cancer? Even things such as diabetes, which is 1 out of 3 Americans are suffering for. They don't have to do that anymore. Healthier plants with more energy and longer life. Make ordering from Angels Health Institute the natural choice when it comes to your health. Just simply call 1-877-890-8209 or order online at angelshealthinstitute.com. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com, and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter where we archive our shows and also give you great resources and information for you to use, as well as to pass on to others whom you think might be able to use it as well. Again, thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.